You're listening to Killcliff's Hazard Ground podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
And welcome into the Hazard Ground podcast, brought to you by our friends at Killcliff. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, who is a Afghanistan and Iraq vet, he's also a country music artist and an author. We'll get to that coming up in just a moment. But just a few reminders. We want to thank you guys for joining us in this new video platform that we have here that you're getting either on hazardground.com or on our YouTube channel, as well as killcliff.com, the Killcliff app, and anywhere else you can consume Killcliff videos. So thank you guys for joining us on this new venture. And as always, thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground community. All right, this week's guest is a 13-year veteran of the U.S. Army, 8 on active duty, 5 currently serving still now in the National Guard, where he holds the rank of Staff Sergeant. He authored a book called Time Cap, and he is currently a country music artist who has released his second EP. And he's also a brand ambassador for a company called Guitars for Veterans. And he is Nick Rucker joining us this week on the Hazard Ground. Nick, welcome, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so a book and a country music artist. Needless to say, you're busy, and so hence why you are now in the National Guard. But, it's great to see whenever veterans can transition from the active force into a whole different world. And obviously the music stuff is important, as now you're working with PTSD and veterans who are struggling with mental health. So we'll get to that coming up in a moment. But for now, start back at the beginning and tell me how and why you got in the Army.
My dad, honestly, he served in Desert Storm, and I just remember all of these nights of my parents were separated. He would come down from Iowa and pick me up, and it was like a 4-hour drive. And he would share all these stories of the highway of hell and all these crazy things during Desert Storm. And I think that most of the time I was kind of like afraid to ask more, but I was always interested. It kind of lit that spark for me. And so as time kind of went on, I told him, and thinking like 2007, 2008, I was thinking about joining. And I talk about it in the book where he says, no kid of mine is ever going to join the Army. I did enough time for all of us. But I kind of took that with a grain of salt or shot of penicillin, whichever one it was, and said, I'm moving on. I'm going to go ahead and do whatever I want to do. And so I joined 2008, and I went to basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And honestly, right out of the gate, I had never been through a culture shock like I had with basic training, and I didn't really know what to expect. And I didn't grow up in a house where there's a bunch of yelling and screaming and everything else. So for me, I was like, oh boy, yeah, what have I got myself into?
Yeah, but see, if your dad was in the military, he didn't warn you anything about basic training and what it was going to be like?
No. I don't.
That's setting you up for failure, isn't it?
Oh yeah. He's just like, I think whenever I left, he was already kind of upset with me. So he was like, oh, you'll learn. Like, oh, you'll figure it out on your own.
Now, do you think he was more upset with you because you were signing up at a time where there were 2 wars going on and he knew that's where you were going, or he thought maybe there was something in life else that you were meant to do?
I don't know. I'd probably be better off asking him nowadays, what his approach was with that. But I just think that I have no idea. I really don't. But
ask, but after all these years, it's maybe worth the answer. But
yeah,
because one day maybe you telling that to your kids.
It's true, and I've already told my girlfriend, I'm like, once our baby's old enough, and if he wants to join the Army, I'm totally okay with that. So that's it's definitely built. It's a character builder. That's what I look at it as.
It's funny. I've had that conversation with my wife and about our kids, and I don't know how I'd feel. I mean, the military has changed so much in the 20 years that I've been in, right? And who knows what it's going to look like in 10 years, 15 years when they can decide to sign up on their own. So I don't 100% know how I'd feel about it. I mean, on one hand, I think the way we fight wars in another 15 years is going to be so dramatically different than how we do it now versus how your dad did it in Desert Storm, let alone Vietnam and years back. And so I don't know. I don't think I'd be against it, but I mean, Lord knows it's a different life that you chose to lead when you put the uniform on.
Yeah, and it's definitely something I just think personally, I'm glad I experienced that regardless of what the, overall experience was and time frame, because I think, I guess from the guys that whenever I joined that were older, on their way out, they were telling me, oh man, things used to be different back then. And then it just kind of keeps revolving door, And so you're just kind of like, all right, well, I guess we'll just, I'll just have my experience and I'll pass it on to the next guys. But you definitely make a good point. The guys that I'm training nowadays, I'm like, I don't know if you'd survive if we went overseas,
Right.
And just the mental side of it. So
I'm at that weird stage in my life, in my military career, where I always have to kind of throw that out, right, to everybody around me. Like back when I, was your rank, or back when I got in, and then you realized how foolish you sound by dating yourself and how archaic it must be to all these young kids looking at you going, boy, that's an old fart. And I find myself doing that. And I'm like, I wish I never said that. I should just act cool and pretend I know what the hell is going on. Anyway, but you said that it was a culture shock for you in basic training. So what was that one moment where for you, it was like, whoa, this was a bad decision?
As soon as I got on the bus to basically go to the barracks.
It was Forrest Gump style, and you get on, hi, I'm Forrest Gump.
Right. Yeah. So you go through the reception and I was there for a week or whatever. And honestly, I was fat and I was shaped and I was just like looking at this as like, hey, this is my last chance to get my life together. And so they loaded us up on that bus and then took us out and we pulled up in front of the barracks. And I remember I'm still friends with him today, but Drill Sergeant UNESCO just met me at the door and he's like, oh, fucking Rucker. He's like, looks like you and I are going to be friends for the next 9 weeks. And I was just on his radar the whole time, just because I was the first person out of the bus. And I was like, great. That was the culture shock for me. And I was like, I think initially, whenever you first get to basic training and you're like, oh, great. Like, I don't want to be that guy that's on somebody's radar for the next 9 weeks or and some change. But here we are. So, that was my culture shock initially. Then just as time went on, of course, you get used to it. Right. And it just becomes life. And I think the other time was the first time you throw on that IBA and you got that extra weight on. And if you've never been one that was like training for certain stuff like that, I nearly passed out on the bayonet range. And I was like, what am I doing?
So wait, was there a moment where you didn't think you were going to make it?
No, I always knew I was going to make it. Yeah. Okay. I just think there was a moment where I was questioning what MOS that I went into. It was like more like I wish I would have chose something that was a little bit more demanding because I went into something that was more like mentally, I guess, demanding than physically demanding. But because after you go through basic training, of course, then you're in really good shape and you're like, I want to stay in really good shape. Then for us that are in field maintenance or whatever that may be, it's you go to AIT and you definitely get out of shape real quick. So
you were a maintenance guy?
Small arms repair. I initially came in as a fire control systems repairer, so a tank electrician. And then as time has progressed, I've transitioned over to 91 Fox, so small arms guy. But yep, I've always been.
Did you go to Fort Lee or Aberdeen for your AIT?
Aberdeen. Yep. Aberdeen,
that's why you got fat, because you were in Aberdeen.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, like that post is fantastic. It's one of the best kept secrets in the Army, and it's it's only a TRADOC post now. You have some EOD units over at Edgewood area, but it's where my OBC was back in the day. Now I'm really dating myself, but yeah, I spent 6 months at Aberdeen, and Coincidentally, I graduated from Loyola College in Baltimore. So right after I got commissioned, I went right to Aberdeen for another 6 months. So it was like an extra 6 months of college.
Yeah, that was the worst. I was there for 6 months too. And there's like thousands of us that were going through school there. And it was hard for them I know that there was like probably 6 NCOs that were in charge of each 6 platoons of guys that we had. And we're talking hundreds of guys in a platoon. And it's just like, they couldn't keep tabs on all of us. It was just ridiculous. So
61st Ordnance Battalion, if I remember correctly. Was that the unit?
Either 63rd, 16th. Yep.
16th. Yeah.
Ordnance Battalion. Yep.
See, my brain still works. All right. So after you finish AIT, you're moving on to where?
Fort Riley, Kansas. So all 8 years of active duty were at Fort Riley, Kansas.
See, that was one of the reasons why, initially I got off active duty was like, they sent me to Fort Hood, Texas. And as a New York kid, right, moving to Texas, you want to talk about culture shocks. That was it. And I'm not sure I could have bared the thought of them sending me to Fort Riley, Kansas or Fort Polk, Louisiana after Fort Hood. And I'm like, man, I just want to live someplace that's normal. And then you realize that the Army does not post any of their bases anywhere that's normal other than Fort Carson and Fort Lewis. Yep. So, and those both have downsides to them. Fort Lewis, it rains 10 months out of the year. And Fort Carson, you're buried in 7 feet of snow 4 months a year. So, the Army does a really good job at figuring out where cool people don't want to hang out. Although you give it out to Fort Carson because the skiing there I hear is great. Never been, but I hear it's fantastic.
I've definitely been around that base. It's nice. And the Fort Riley though, so coming from Aberdeen to Fort Riley, actually Fort Riley was like 2 hours from where I grew up. And so that was the benefit was I was able to go home on weekends. It was still within the 250-mile radius. And hey, I got to go home and see my family whenever I wanted, which really didn't matter because like a month after I got to Fort Riley, I remember the day that I got there, went through processing, went to my unit. My unit was actually in the field, doing a field problem for the deployment. And I got called into the Sergeant Major's office, the battalion Sergeant Major, and Sergeant Major Griffin. I'll never forget this moment, but he brought me in and he's like, "How you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, good. Good, Sergeant Major." And he's like, "Well, hopefully you're ready to go to Iraq because that's where we're going in 30 days. And I was like, "Well, goddamn." In my head, I'm thinking, "Well, goddamn, here we go." And it's the only Army experience I have are basic training and AIT. So and of course, as you know as well, that's nothing compared to what you'll like experience in your unit or whatever you do. And so from there, that was just like, I think I spent one day in the motor pool or so preparing, just talking to meeting the guys. And so whenever we deployed, I really didn't know anybody in my unit at all, which was kind of a bummer because I'm an E1 at the time. And of course, I'm getting the shit end of the stick on every single thing that's happening.
Plus, you're still the FNG regardless.
Yes. Yep.
The FNG always kind of gets it.
Yep. Yeah. So we got to Baghdad. Actually went through Kuwait, of course, Camp Buehring, went through our 2 weeks of training there. And that was kind of, at that point, I was just kind of made up my mind. I guess I felt like after that first deployment, you kind of make a decision in your head. Hey, I'm either going to grow up really fast or I'm going to, fall behind and I'm going to wish I hadn't left. And so I basically I didn't know anybody, wasn't really friends with anybody, but maybe like couple people, and just decided, I'm just kind of going to do what I know to do, which is lift weights, keep reading, and keep learning everything that I possibly can to better myself.
Now, what did they tell you about the mission itself? And by the way, what did you tell your dad and your family about when you got notified for deployment?
So the mission itself was we deployed on our own. So usually, I mean, I'm used to like the second deployment, we deployed with the whole brigade. We deployed just as ourselves as a single maintenance company, and went over and basically we supported the third ID and fell under a battalion from Hunter Army Airfield in Georgia.
Yeah.
And so our mission basically was like, hey, we're going to do maintenance. We're going to do some convoy security. And then other than that, we're just a part of maintaining everything that was on that base on Camp Liberty. And so whenever we got there, it really didn't change much. And I know that whenever we first got there, they were talking about redirecting us to Afghanistan, we could have been used better there. And there was a lot of talk whenever we first got into country. And so then getting to actual Afghanistan or to Camp Buehring and going through kind of the training, the pre-training and stuff like that, you start going through those classes, the mandatory classes. They start talking about all the IEDs. And right at that time, RKGs, those Russian grenades were a big thing, going through the tops and them kind of tossing them down and going through the gunner's turret. And so that was the big talk. And so me, honestly, I don't have any friends that are in the unit that are telling me about previous deployments or anything like that. So I'm just expecting as soon as we get off this plane in Baghdad, we're going to start getting shot at, and I'm going to have to like run for cover. And I remember having that in the back of my mind as soon as we got off the plane at Baghdad International Airport, that was what the deal was going to be. But obviously it wasn't. So we got there, and it was still super confusing as to what we were actually doing. A lot of times, like I kind of compare it to the second deployment to Afghanistan, which was more organized, well organized. We knew exactly what we were going there for, we were supporting, and everything we were doing as a small arms shop. We're going to who we were going to support. But this one was just like we got there. Nobody really knew what was going on still. We had a massive formation. The first day we got to Baghdad, which everybody was like, why are we in this huge 115 people formation right now, this close to the city? But obviously they knew something that we didn't at the time. But coming to find out a few days later, whenever I first came in contact with my first mortar attack, that's when I was like, oh shit, we probably shouldn't have been in a formation in the, that close to the city. So it's basically, leading up to that and getting to Iraq. That's what that how that transcribed. Go ahead. Sorry.
What was the tempo like every day? I mean, as a maintenance guy, I kind of get the notion of the mission. And I know you said a little bit of convoy security. So did you get a chance to get outside the wire often, or was it just more of the, get up, eat breakfast, go, fix vehicles, go to lunch, fix vehicles, go to the gym, go back to chow and call it a day? Was it, so that mundane sort of lifestyle?
Yeah, that deployment was definitely. So I actually got tasked working for the battalion sergeant major as soon as we got back. And basically I was his right-hand guy. Drove him around wherever he went and did a bunch of carpentry work for him, etc. And that deployment wasn't. It was good. I came back with 7 AAMs and battlefield promotion to specialist at the time, so it worked out for me. And then I got back I remember the last day I got back to my unit, and they were making a list of who got what awards on the deployment, and I'm standing there around the guys I haven't spent the last year with, but we're in the same unit together, and I'm like, 7 AMs, and they're like, you piece of shit. I'm sorry, I was just right place at the right time,
Yeah, POS is more like brown nose or kiss ass. Yeah, where to go? Listen, I mean, that's some people take those jobs, right, and they look at them in a way where it doesn't benefit them, and other people take those jobs and try to take advantage of them. And clearly, you were the latter, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I would tend to think that most sergeant majors wouldn't hand out awards that people didn't reserve. It's probably not in their nature.
Correct. And this one was he was pretty tough to work for most days. But the overall, that's where kind of the book started, and that was interesting. It was never supposed to become a book, and it basically during the Iraq deployment, it detailed a lot of just the everyday kind of like what you were talking about, the mundane, trying to keep up with daily life, keeping yourself mentally just sound, and honestly surviving thousands and thousands of mortar attacks. And that's where I think I started writing that with no intention on ever publishing it, but it eventually kind of, as I got moved on to the second deployment and so on, it definitely turned into an actual book. And my main reasoning behind that was there's not a lot of these books. There's not a lot of just the regular Joe on these deployments, just talking about, what was going on in your head, how you're dealing with that mentally. And I felt like, me personally, I know you've had Anthony Swafford on here.
Yeah.
That's what I kind of compared it to, was just that jarhead kind of deployment where you're never doing really anything combat related besides walking and doing what your job is. And
but I think, the idea of writing down your thoughts. And yes, during my first deployment was in Iraq, I kept a journal that I wrote in every day, every 2 days, 3 days, whatever my schedule would really allow me to sit down and type. And when it was all said and done, it ended up being about 170 pages, single spaced, not the way you write your college papers to squeeze out an extra page. It was just like regular small font. And it was just my thoughts poured out on paper. Over everything that I had went through, experiences that had happened, reactions to things, emotional, stuff related to back home and what I was thinking and feeling, relationships, all that stuff kind of just poured out on paper. And the only page I've ever shared with anybody is the final page where I kind of wrote my, you want to say the things that I learned or the things that I took away from the deployment and everything else. But I always kind of wondered, if I shared those thoughts, and it was something right after I got back, people's like, you should try to publish it, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, I don't know. Some of that stuff seems and feels really personal. Some of that stuff seems and feels really like people who haven't been there wouldn't understand. And I wonder, when you started writing those things, did you ever think that those were thoughts that were being shared with anybody that anybody could even relate to?
Yeah, definitely. Even leading up to publishing it, I was reading back through it and I'm like, I don't want anybody to know this shit. Like half of it, honestly, because you're really, you're putting yourself out there on a level that if it's making you uncomfortable, like this is probably, something very, very personal.
Did you go back and read it before you published it?
Well, yes, I did. So in Alabama, I had a school teacher, an English school teacher, who actually helped me edit it. And we read back through it every single day. Like we get together every night and read like 2 or 3 pages. And it got so emotional to a point that I was reliving some of the experiences that I had, that I was like, I can't fucking do this. This isn't, I don't want people to know this, people that I associate with now. I don't want them to see that kind of side of me. But at the end, I was just like, I kind of closed my eyes and just sent it to the publisher. And I was just like, well, whatever happens, happens now. So
yeah, I've never went back and read mine. I've always said I was going to do it. I never went back and now I'm almost scared to read it, if that makes sense. I'm almost scared to think that, there was a younger person and a younger, I got a term, kid, and it's weird as we sit here and we record this. I think I just passed my 15-year anniversary of coming back from that deployment, when I got off the plane and coming back from that deployment. So, there's an entirely different person who had all those thoughts and feelings and emotions. And I don't know that I want anybody to know that person, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Yeah. That's basically how I felt through the whole process of editing and all of that. Was this is, I'm like you're saying, a completely different person than I was then, and I'm talking about relationships that I was in then and everything else. And I'm
Yeah.
like, nobody needs to know this. So the editing process definitely was like, yeah, we're going to take some of this out. But the overall story of it, and just letting people know that, like, hey, I whenever people are gone, like your family members or whoever this may be, and they're not out doing, God's work, then this is probably what's going on in their heads. And
Right.
and this is something that maybe not only you should know, but you should probably know, so you can, if they're having issues, to help them out.
Was there any sort of self-awareness when you got back that some of the things you were thinking and feeling, I'm gonna say, were problematic, or could have led you down a road that could have, changed your life dramatically? Was there any kind of, thoughts in like, hey, maybe things aren't right between the ears right now?
Yeah, definitely. Whenever I first got back, and honestly, I think, like, I'm just the kind of person that the easier my life I can make it, the better I am. And so if I can kind of tunnel my vision into as little things as possible, and that's what a deployment, I felt, does. You have your job, and you have one option of soap to choose from that you're going to buy or not buy, and it's very simple. And for me, coming back, the weekend that I got back, I didn't sleep for like 3 days. I had just this needed to keep going. I just felt like I was like, oh, I just need to stay up, and had some issues with that. And then finally I had like a panic attack. I had my first panic attack ever. And I remember my mom was like, oh my gosh, I thought I was having a heart attack. Took me to the emergency room, found out that they were like, oh, what have you been doing the past, 72 hours or whatever? And I was like, oh, I just got back from Iraq. And they're like, oh, we've seen some people in here that have just gotten back from Iraq. They're having the same similar issues. So they gave me some medication, and which was Ambien, which was, on the way home, I was just like, oh, geez, am I extremely drunk right now, or what's going on? But so yeah, there was some points coming home from that deployment where I was like, I need to go on another deployment now, like, just to keep, like, right and feel right. And I definitely, as soon as I got back, I missed it. But I guess that, if that makes sense.
Now, when do you get back, month and year? When do you get back from that deployment?
So we got back, let's see, July, I think 13th, 2009.
Okay.
Yep.
So does anybody in your unit know about emotionally or mentally what's going on upstairs?
No, not really. I had a buddy, Sean, who, he and I were really close, but it wasn't really like hey, we're going to share our feelings close. It was more of like,
Right.
buddy. He knew something was off, and I knew something was off with him too. And, I didn't really weigh the stress of that particular deployment, just from I guess what kind of stress it had on everyone, because we had like 6 or 7 suicides from that
Oh,
unit.
really?
Yeah.
While you were in Iraq?
Once we got back.
Once you got
Yeah.
back, okay, all right.
Yep. And then we've had a lot of people just end up in prison, and just a lot of, like, you're like, what? Like, because once I got back from Afghanistan, there was nothing like that ever happened. And to me, it was like, what was so different about that one compared to, Afghanistan? What was the difference? And the only thing I could honestly chalk it up to was the caliber of person that was coming in at the time when I went to Iraq. We've got a completely different set of people, if that makes sense. I felt like whenever I was coming through and processing, the Army was taking everybody because they needed numbers, and felonies, and just whatever you had on your record didn't really matter. I remember going through MEPS and guys that were like, oh, I had this many DUIs, but I was able to still get in here. And you're like, what? How's that even possible? So that was the only thing I could really chalk it up to. We had one guy who a few years ago actually shot a guy outside of a bar in Kansas, and he's in prison now. It's just fucking these crazy stories. We had another guy who actually, the last time I saw him, he came to one of my shows, and I talked to him at the bar that night, and I was just like, "Hey man, how you doing?" And he was good. We hadn't seen each other since Iraq, and just kind of exchanged stories that only we knew at the time. And then a week later, he was dead in a car wreck, and it was just like, what the fuck? Like, why does this keep happening?
Do you think some of that is guys who are predisposed to sort of those things happening, or was it purely the deployment had that kind of effect on people?
That's hard to tell. I mean, without, without probably gauging those people, personally.
Right.
I felt like there was nothing that was so bad that I, ever wanted to take my own life. There was nothing ever that really ran through my head that I can recall that was like, I saw this or this or this, or, that like I'm trying to deal with something that was extremely hard. So I don't know, unless, it would have to be like, hey, let's put all these guys in a room. We're just going to like analyze them for the next few months and see, what the actual deal was. But I have no idea.
So when do you get to your next deployment in Afghanistan? I know you mentioned you were just missing when you got back. How does that whole transaction take place?
So I was actually due to get out. I was coming up on my into my 4-year term, and I had moved units. So I got back to Fort Riley, and I did an interpost transfer, which restarted my 2 years at Fort Riley. And so I got to another company there, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, we're going to Afghanistan. Well, I had like 3 months left, and I was kind of on the fence already about whether or not I wanted to go get out, but I'd kind of grown attached to the guys in my shop that I worked with directly. And so I was like, I can't in good conscience leave, and knowing that they're going to Afghanistan and I'm going to go be a civilian. Like I just couldn't, I don't think I had it in me to live with myself with that. And so the next week signed up to basically go, and knowing that I was going to Afghanistan. That was 2012. And we basically, our shop was 5 guys. We had a warrant officer, a E6, E5, and then there was 3 of us lower enlisted at the time, so E4s and 1 E3, all deployed as a shop, which was better because, hey, there's a small amount of us. And so going into that deployment, we knew our mission was going to be flying all over Eastern Afghanistan, supporting everybody on 4th Brigade from the 1st Infantry. And it was all basically us going out to small cops and going out to these really small fobs out in the middle of nowhere that were getting attacked every single day. Like whenever most of the guys that you interview on here, I'm like, those are the guys that we took over, that were over doing in 128 infantry or 216 infantry, that were all, taking the fight to the Taliban or Al Qaeda whenever we were there. And we were out supporting them every single day and basically trying to keep them up to speed on going out to their OPs and tearing their 50 cals apart. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to clean this for you because this thing isn't going to work the next time you have to use it. So I'm just trying to do what we can with what we had. And that one was a little bit more of the Wild West, I felt like. That was not like we were in Iraq, KBR was taking care of us. We were living the good life. Barry Switzer's coming next week and we get to meet him or something, And so this was more of like, hey, everybody's going to take a giant bite out of this shit sandwich and we're all going to enjoy it. And so that was like that to me I felt like, hey, this is a deployment. I'm actually deploying. And this is like, I felt like I was doing my part, I guess. And so we started out, honestly, like the first few missions that we went on were, we jumped in Blackhawks. We were flown to wherever we were going to do maintenance on equipment or maintaining 120 millimeter mortars or doing full inspections on 777 howitzers, whatever it may be. They're flying us out to do that. And we were on these small FOBs where these guys were engaging the enemy while we were there doing small arms repair. And we'll be in a building and these guys get attacked, and there's like, hey, you have to stop taking apart this 120 millimeter bipod and put it back together because they need it right now. And so we got really good at our job. Let's just say that, because there's nothing that expedites a process faster than like, hey, we're under attack outside. We need that shit now.
So because the threat of danger or operational tempo was different, given what you had already experienced in your first deployment, were you able to look at this thing and handle it better, or did you, in the moment, not recognize that I guess you were being pushed to the limit to a certain extent?
I had a good grasp on it. As soon as I got there, I was like, I knew what to do. I kind of read back through my previous notes from the first deployment, and I was like, okay, this is what I did. This is the routine I had, and let's just pick up where we left off, basically. And so that's why I think, you're talking about journaling and everything else. Those are good references for yourself going to the next deployment or, going anywhere. And it's important to have those. But as far as being sound state of mind going there, yeah, I was good. I was ready to go. I feel like I kind of thrive in that kind of environment in general. And to me, it's a better way of life some days, I guess.
Did you get a chance to get outside the wire while you were in Afghanistan?
Yeah, we were pretty much outside the wire. Most of our missions, there was always like this OP or something outside the wire that we had to go out and we had to do services on this or that. And so I remember the first one, and the first time you actually, I guess for me, it was lock and load. And you're like, oh, you're actually in the fight now. That's what it felt like to me. But that was just like a very like, okay, now I'm actually doing something, doing something with my Army career, whatever it may be. And so we had just got to Afghanistan. It was the first week, and we climbed up on this 300 foot from where we were, up on the side of this mountain. And there was an OP up there. There was the Afghan National Army up with our, I think 128 was there. And we basically were going up there to service a 50 cal, and it was horrible. Like climbing, you're already in Afghanistan, and then you're in full gear climbing up the side of this mountain, and it was horrible. But you get up there, and these guys are living out of a Connex, and the Afghan National Army's over in a bunker made out of sandbags, and they've got a goat tied up out front, and they're getting ready to kill it for dinner that night. And so we serviced that. And this was right on the line going into Pakistan. There was basically a mountain range that divided Pakistan between Margah, where these guys are at, and into Pakistan. And there was one route that the Taliban liked to basically travel, come into that area, and they would cause issues in the little town of Margah that was right there. And so we were up there basically trying to make sure that they were combat ready if anything ever happened. And so we took apart that 50 cal, and that 50 cal was in horrible condition, got it up and running, and did our job and took off and went to the next one. And I think during Afghanistan, we did like 63 missions. And we supported the Polish commandos while we were there. We supported our special forces guys. We worked a lot with the small arms guys for the weapons specialists for special forces. They would come. We would basically swap. How did you do this under stress, and how would you do this, and do you have any extra parts? The Navy, we did go out to a small FOB, which was manned by half of our guys, half of the Afghan National Army. They had a colonel there who he requested us to come up and do small arms training with his guys. They were getting ready to, turn over some of our country guns to the Afghan National Army. Yeah, so we took them through learning how to do, basic stuff with the 240, 249, M16, and everything except for pretty much Mark 19 and 50 cal was what we were kind of turning over to these guys. And that was pretty much like the mid of the deployment. And as we're going through that, we're I guess going out on not only air convoys, I guess, but we're going out on like road convoys. We're going between FOBs, everything else. And that was probably more stressful than, flying. I think a few times whenever we were flying, something was probably going on that we just didn't know about, just because due to the fact that there was no reason for us to know about it. It's not like we're going to poke out the back of a Black Hawk and fire some M4 rounds. But yeah, there was definitely some times where we were all kind of ready to hit the road, go back home.
Was there any casualties you guys sustained on the deployment?
Not in our unit. We had total, I want to say the brigade had a loss of, I think, 12 or 13 guys. And a lot of them were, of course, our infantry units that were out at the smaller cops and the smaller FOBs and everything else. We did have, I think, one suicide while we were there. Our unit, though, mainly, we were the only ones that were honestly going outside the wire. Our shop, our 5 guys. And so our unit would have never really had any casualties unless we had, mortars or anything like that. But that never really happened in Afghanistan.
When do you leave Afghanistan?
So I take off in, that was February 2013. Towards the end of the deployment, everything kind of slowed down for us. I started working with the Jordanian army, and they were taking over basically all of our operations as far as base security. They were splitting the guard towers with us, which was, every guard tower should have had an interpreter in it because neither of us, it was just like, I guess we're going to stand here and stare at each other for the next 7, 8, 12 hours. Yeah. And actually a lot of those guys that I was in those guard towers with, we ended up figuring out ways to communicate, whether that was just, it was whatever. And, and so I've kept in touch with a few of those guys since we left, which is pretty cool. They've, gone on to do great things. But 2013 came home, and I was basically, I had a girlfriend throughout the whole deployment, was getting ready to get married. And I guess I just had this fucking meltdown. I mean, whenever I got back, I wasn't I don't know if I was just not ready, but or what it was, or I just started drinking, and it's kind of started there. Which I think most people, if they've kind of heard my story, that's kind of what I guess I'm known for, is, well, not drinking anymore. It's kind of what I'm so it, yeah. Hey, that's a drunk guy. No. So that's kind of where the drinking kind of picked up. And I think and honestly, through therapy and everything else, trying to piece together, what was going on, what would have happened that would have kind of clicked in my brain and said, hey, let's do this instead of getting our shit together. I don't know, unless it was just like, hey, I didn't like the responsibilities that I had when I got back. So ended up getting married like a few months later. The day I got back from Afghanistan, I proposed. And
yeah, by the way, that solves everything.
Yeah. Just keep accumulating all the shit on top of each other. It's a great idea.
I haven't met a problem that marriage hasn't cured yet.
Right. I was just trying to be a part of the percentage of the military that's been divorced. So.
Yeah, keeping your half of the bargain. Exactly.
Yeah.
Literally, by the way, half. Yeah, literally.
Literally, yeah, definitely. So we get married 9 months later, and I'm just 18 pack a night, like no big deal. Like I'm building up my tolerance, and that's my main focus. That's all I care about is like, hey, when can I get drunk next? That's all I was thinking.
Were you off active duty at this point? Or you still were on?
I was still on active duty. Yep. I was working on.
Did anybody on your unit notice that you had started drinking heavily?
Yeah. They weren't going to say anything. I mean, it was more of I kept getting written up and getting counseled for being late or whatever it may be. I had one NCO that was really hard charged on getting me kicked out, and I was just kind of like, looking back now, I'm like, I don't blame him at all, just because they had sent me to SATOP, and I was still drinking. Whenever I was at SATOP, I was just telling them, hey, yeah, I'm not drinking at all, which 90% of the guys that are in there are doing the same thing. It's just kind of, we have to go through this hurdle to get back to the unit and not have this thing going on. But yeah, I was still drinking, missing PT formation like pretty much every day, and just becoming a real piece of shit. And so whenever the divorce happens, that's kind of whenever it gets super bad, and start drinking really heavily. Then there's a few times where I'm like, I'm surprised I woke up this morning, and the effects that I was having on me is I'm going from running, I mean, this is nothing to brag about, but like high 13s, like 14-minute 2-mile, to now I'm running, I can barely make it 17 minutes. Like it's taking everything in my body to go out and run this PT test. And that's how I guess I noticed that there was something wrong. Like there was the difference in my body. Things were starting to change. And I guarantee that if I had gone to a doctor then, that they would have already told me that I have early stages of like, I'm damaging my liver. Like, because that's what they told me whenever I wound up in rehab. And so ultimately the divorce happened. I get off active duty 2 years later in 2015.
By choice, or is it one of those things where they kind of said to you, either you can walk away or we're going to put you out kind of deal?
It was actually, I'd been a specialist for too long, and they're like, hey, you got to get the fuck out because you're not moving forward. That's how it was sold to me. But it was probably a accumulation of those things. Like, right. Yeah, just get out. The Army will be better if you get out. So so that takes me to, hey, I'm a civilian now, and nobody has any power over me, and so I can do whatever I want. And I just got this nice bonus because I agreed to join the National Guard, and so let's go blow that on Royals World Series tickets and booze.
Not a terrible decision on the Royals World Series tickets. I mean, especially for that franchise, you might not never see it again in your lifetime. So,
oh, I know. Yeah, it was a good game. What I remember of it. Yeah. So, yeah, just drinking. I mean, like I said, it was like 18 pack a night, or if I didn't have that, it was in just taking like risks that, what the fuck are you doing, man? Like, I wish somebody would have just like grabbed me and fucking slapped the shit out of me and said, hey man, get your shit together. And I, and like what you're kind of talking about earlier is that with the first deployment are those guys with pre issues that were already before the military, or is that actually from the deployment? And I don't know. It's trying to figure that out still. I think on some days I'm like, yeah, it was like I had this upbringing that was really kind of shitty in a shitty situation most of the time. And then again, I'm like, but I never drank before like that. So I didn't really know. But I definitely know it was escalated because, I mean, I think, as you know, coming from active duty, it's definitely, the military is an enabler for drinking, especially, I guess, if you live in the barracks and all of that. That's kind of what happens on the weekends.
And for the record, I mean, I don't say this negatively. It's just the military is an enabler of all vices, right?
Yes.
Because there's time, there's people who do the same vices you do, and it is a way to unwind from a very regimented lifestyle. And whether that vice is drinking, whether it is, some form of drugs or whatever. And again, those drugs aren't necessarily ones that are illegal, but gambling, whatever it may be. I mean, you live such a regimented lifestyle. You need some way to do something that's counter to that to sort of balance out life. So I think, and as you said, there's a lot of people in the military, so they're all sort of looking for an outlet, and it's easy to latch on to somebody else who has the same outlet as you do.
Correct. Yeah, that's definitely true. It's just a melting pot of different people that are all have, come from some history of, hey, I was trying to get out of a situation, or it's just, you do have the good guys that are like, hey, I came here for a reason and I'm not going to be a part of that. So, but you have us assholes that kind of ruin it for everybody else.
So how does the drinking eventually stop?
So actually the whole reason I moved to Omaha was I had my warrant officer that from actually both deployments, we went on both deployments together. He moved here and he has family here. And he said, hey man, you should move here to Omaha until you figure out what you want to do with your life. And I was like, okay. So I moved up here with hopes of, hey, I'm going to kickstart a music career, and started here in Omaha and kind of see where it goes from there. I've never really lived in a city besides Kansas City. And it was pretty short-lived. But yeah, so that's what ultimately brought me here to Omaha. And then I lived with him for probably 6 months, and he was the one that started saying, hey, dude, you need to pump the brakes on the drinking because I don't really want to walk down to the basement one day and find you dead. Like, I remember I think he told me that one time, if I remember right. And eventually I didn't take what he was saying and use it in a positive way. I took it and used it in a negative way. And I moved out and was like, hey, I'm going to get my own place. And
if you don't want to watch me drink, I'll just drink something that you're not. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
And a solution, not a wise one, but it's still a solution.
Right. And so I'm watching, and it was funny because as I'm getting deeper into this alcoholism, I'm watching like those shows. What are they? Where they, those addiction shows where they try to turn people. Intervention, that one. Yeah. And I'm really, really tied to these ones that are military background guys, and they're trying to turn their lives around and all of this. But at the same time, I'm not using them in a positive way. I'm using them as a way of enabling, saying, oh, that guy's doing it. I can do it too. Like, I can still drink, whatever it may be. And just making some fucking horrible decisions that financially, and all these other.
Example.
I bought 2 dogs one time that I probably shouldn't have bought because I lived in an apartment and I didn't understand they had to pay like a pet deposit. And I have these 2 Burmese mountain dogs that are fucking ginormous in this 800 square foot apartment. And yeah, it was a bad idea.
You still have the dogs?
No, I sold them. I was like, yeah, this was probably a bad idea. So they live in the country outside of Omaha now, where they can
roam and be,
be
dogs.
Basically fucking polar bears. So getting to the point where it was like, hey, this is my D-Day ultimately, was we had gone to a concert the night before, Eric and I, and we'd gone back to Eric's the warrant officer, and one of his family members was in town, and we'd gone back to his house after this show was over and proceeded to drink into the wee hours of the morning. I did, and woke up at probably like 6 o'clock in the morning, still drunk. Drove across town to my house and got there and started drinking again. I mean, until I ran out of beer. I had probably like six beers left in the fridge. And then once that was gone, it was like probably 10 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock. And the liquor stores didn't open, or they wouldn't start selling liquor until 11 on Sundays. And so I called an Uber. They took me to the gas station down from my house. And that's kind of all I remember after that, was getting the beer, coming back to my apartment, drinking like 2 of them, and then having kind of a meltdown. I know it happened just from people that I've talked to now about what had happened. And I talked to Eric. I called him and I said, man, I'm really not in a good place. And he already knew. He was just like, I guess, waiting kind of for that. Like, I needed to realize it. He knew. Everybody around me knew. And so he was just like, I'm coming over like right now. And so he came over and got me and took me to the VA and took me to the emergency room there, where they were like, I can't believe you're alive. Your fucking blood alcohol is like 3 something. Yeah, I can't remember what it was. It was extremely high. And they gave me an IV. And I remember my moment was my grandpa was actually, he was in town helping my sister move. And she lives like just probably 30 minutes from me, and she was moving into a different house. And Eric had called them, and all of a sudden I'm in this like exam room, and my grandpa walks in, and like my grandpa was pretty much like my dad growing up. Like he was that role model. My dad was like not around most of my childhood, and my grandpa was that guy. And he walked in. I just remember him saying, "You need to get your shit together." And he'd never cussed in front of me. He'd never said anything like that. And I knew he was serious. And for me, that was like, all right, yep, okay. And so they took me. I stayed overnight, and the next morning, the doctor came in, and he's like, "Hey, so you've got we took your blood, ran some tests, and did some checks on your liver and all these different tests to make sure that you hadn't done any like permanent damage to yourself, but you've got some damage done to your liver." And he spit out some numbers that I had no idea what he was saying. But he's like, you've got 2 options. He's like, we can send you home. You can go keep doing what you're doing right now, and we'll see you in a month. Or you can go to rehab for the next 28 days, and you can hopefully come out on the other end without this part of your life still going on. And I was like, yeah, let's go to rehab. Like now, if we can go today, let's do that. And
you surprised that you were able to make that decision so easily? I mean, as you said, most people sort of fight it a little bit, right? Like you don't realize you're an alcoholic. So were you surprised that you were able to kind of come to that come to Jesus moment?
And not even meaning this as a joke, I was still a little drunk whenever I made that decision. And so it helped quite a bit, in all honesty, because I know the first day that I kind of woke up and was like, I knew I was sobering up like completely, which was it was 2 days later. I kind of knew the routine as far as like what my body goes through whenever I'm detoxing. Yeah. And that kind of pins and needles feeling all throughout my body. Anyway, that ultimately was like, that first day I was like, oh fuck, what did I do? Like, I had that feeling, like, and I kind of just put my head down and kept to myself and was just like, I'm just going to do this. It was so crazy. And, you know, I'm not one for really, I'm not really spiritual, all that stuff. But the guy I roomed with initially right out of the gate in rehab was from my grandparents' hometown, which is 96 people. And so the likelihood of that ever happening was like, what is this? So went through rehab. And I mean, I'm in rehab with all veterans. Everybody's a veteran in there. All different wars, Vietnam, Desert Storm, it was just a huge melting pot, Air Force, Navy, whatever it may be. And just going through that and seeing the guys that had real issues, really, really bad issues, that were in their, 50s or I guess 60s, 70s, with Vietnam and all of that. I was like, I don't have any fucking issues. Like, I have nothing to fucking complain about. Like, and I think for me, that was kind of the huge eye opener. Was I was put here in this situation, not because I'm trying to get better myself, but I need to help other people, rather than just myself. And throughout that, and I made a lot of like long lasting friends still that I talk to pretty regularly, that I went through rehab with. And that's honestly like what you talked about in the opener was Guitars for Veterans, was how I came in contact with that. Guitars for Veterans was just really coming off the ground then. And now they're huge, but they had asked for volunteers, of anybody that had musical experience, that would want to sign up and give guitar lessons to veterans who are struggling with PTSD. And I said, yeah, definitely. Like, I would love to do that. I kind of became a yes man there for a while, if you've seen that movie. And so going through that, started just helping out, volunteering when I could, played some pretty big shows, and just getting out and meeting these guys they're struggling with PTSD. And just, I did some public speaking, just sharing my alcohol story, and coming back, going through rehab and all of that. And just meeting veterans I've met guys from World War II that, dealt with alcohol problems at one point in their lives. And it's just humbling, meeting those guys, World War II, Vietnam, because you're like, that's who I grew up like respecting, I guess, from the movies I saw and the experiences that I had with other knowing veterans from my hometown where I grew up. Was these were the guys that, that were plowing the way at some point for us to live the life that we are today. And my dad definitely helped with that quite a bit, was just understanding the importance of respecting those guys and showing respect to guys in the military.
You mentioned that when you moved to Omaha, that you wanted to do that to start a music career. So give me the background in music, and amidst all the, drinkings and rehabs and everything else, I guess it was a start and stop kind of deal for you. But how does the proclivity for wanting to start a music career actually turn into one for you?
Yeah, it was, I'd been playing guitar since I was probably 13. I'd been in metal bands whenever I was a kid. And which was so random because where I grew up in Northwest Missouri, near Kansas City, it was country. I mean, Garth Brooks, George Strait, that was it. That's what you listened to. If you didn't, you were wrong. And so whenever I started listening to Mudvayne and Nine Inch Nails and all this crazy shit, my family was like, what? I remember the first time I let my grandpa listen to Korn, the Life is Peachy album. The first, that, ooh, whatever he does in the beginning, my grandpa was like, get that shit out of my house. And it's like, all right. So I'd been in metal bands growing up and hard rock bands. And then whenever I was on active duty, I always played guitar. I always wrote songs here and there. And
were you the guy in the barracks who always had a guitar, and every time everybody was sitting around, you were just strumming away, playing music?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. It was one of those.
And they
got them in the officer court too, by the way. They bring their guitar everywhere just to be annoying.
Yeah. And everybody usually was like, shut the fuck up, like from down the hall. And you're like, God damn it.
You see the guy come with, oh, he's back with the guitar again. We're going to listen to him play.
Yeah. So I was playing, started like before I got off active duty. I was in a band called Alone After All. And if you ever want to listen to it, we're on YouTube. But that was a rock band. And that was more comparable to like Breaking Benjamin kind of sound. And we had some good stuff. And we were short-lived. We had one EP that came out. And we played one show together. But it was awesome. And then after that, I was like, it's a lot easier to go into country. I knew country. I'd always played country growing up. And it's easier to do as a one-man show. And so I started going to this open mic in Manhattan, Kansas, called RC McGraw's. And some big names had played on that stage, like Static X. Wayne Static had played there, like one of his last shows before he died. And a lot of big name country bands. Hell Yeah plays there. It was just like, oh, this is fucking awesome. I'm playing at this place where all these guys that I've listened to growing up played, which is kind of a cool feeling the first time you do it. And so we started going to these open mics, and then I heard about NSAI, which is the Nashville Songwriters Association Incorporated. And ultimately, they have chapters all over the United States. You go in and present a song that you've written to a group of people, and they say yay or nay, whether they like it or they don't like it, what you should do better. And I took this song, Love You a Little Longer, that I wrote, played it there, and they were like, hey, that's pretty good. It's never like, oh shit, you're the next whoever's popular right now. But they were like, yeah, you could do this better. It gave me enough confidence that I kept going as a solo artist. And started booking shows kind of left and right. And then that's kind of like after, like once I got through the military, got off active duty, moved to up here to Omaha, and had plans of kind of igniting that music career. But I still played shows, but man, it was fucking rough. It was playing half hour and then stopping for an hour. And bars don't like to pay for guys that are just drinking the whole time. They're like, yeah, so you're $150 an hour just got cut down to $10 an hour because of how much you drank. So the music kind of took a back seat, but then as I went through rehab and all of that, came out the other end, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna fucking just beat the shit out of this and really, really do some good stuff. Put out the second EP a couple years later after rehab, which was kind of a huge deal for me personally. I grew up in Missouri, and one of my favorite bands was Story of the Year. And I don't know if you've ever listened to them or not, but they had that song Until the Day I Die. If you heard it, you would know who it is. And they were huge in 2003 whenever I was graduating from high school. And I had just randomly wrote the lead singer on Instagram and was like, hey, I'd like to record at your studio sometime. And sure enough, he replied back, and I was like, holy shit, this is fucking awesome. And he's like, yeah, I'd love to record. And I'm like, is this really happening right now? And so I went down to St. Louis and took like probably 6 separate trips to go down and record a 5-song EP with Dan Marcello of Story of the Year. And he sings on one of my songs, which was it was an uncomfortable day asking him if he would like want to sing on it, because he's a huge guy. I mean, they've got fucking gold records and all this. And I'm like, hey man, would you want to like do some vocals on this one song? And he's like, oh yeah, for sure. And I'm like, okay, then that wasn't as bad as I thought. So
lesson learned. Hey, never shoot your shot, right? Slide into the DM if you have to. It can't hurt. Don't be creepy about it, people. You know, you can slide into DMs without being creepy. So
right,
lesson learned there.
I think like the best advice I could give is don't be too detailed about why you're writing. I think that's why some people didn't respond, because yeah, it can get creepy. But that was awesome recording with him. And then I had actually reached out to Richard Patrick of the band Filter. I don't know if you remember them or not.
Mm-hmm. Take my picture, Filter.
Take my picture. Hey man, nice shot.
Yeah, those are the guys. I know those guys.
Yeah, so I'd written him when so Richard's been like 15 years sober. And whenever I was trying to get sober, I wrote him and I said, hey man, like I still have the message too. It's fucking crazy, but telling him, I'm trying to get my life together. What advice do you have for me? Like I'm fucking like at rock bottom. Took him 2 years to respond, but he finally did. And I remember the day that I was driving to a show, and this is after I'd gotten sober. I was driving to a show in Bedford, Iowa, and I was getting into no man's land, so I was losing service. And all of a sudden I see like on Instagram, you have a message from Filter Richard Patrick. And I'm like, what? I fucking automatically, I'm like, oh shit, pull the car over to the side of the road, get out. And I'm literally like fucking Chris Farley on fucking Black Sheep.
Right.
And so he's like, hey man, like, sorry it took so long to respond, but just wanted to say, hope everything's okay. And that you kind of, hopefully you found your way. And I was like, Richard, yeah. I'm like, I've been sober for a year now and everything's great. And so this kickstarted this friendship that I was like, what the fuck is happening once again? And basically the next day, you know, I was just kind of like, man, we should just talk on the phone because I'm tired of texting and you sending me pictures of your thousands of fucking super expensive guitars.
And things I can't afford.
Yeah. And so we get on the horn and I'm just like fangirling, man. It's just like, this is a guy, you know, like take a picture. Like you said, it's like that song that I listened to whenever I was a kid in the 90s. And then just all their albums. I listened to it the whole year I was in Iraq whenever they came out with Soldiers of Misfortune. Mm-hmm. And was just a huge fan. And we have this friendship now that it's like we FaceTime and I throw music ideas to him and I'm like, what do you think of this? And he's just like, no, it's not going to work. Or it is going to work, whatever it may be.
So when does the book come out in all this?
The book comes out, the book, starting to take the book serious, comes out in 2019, probably 18,
so
19.
You're clear sober at this point in time.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And I had the lady from Alabama who had come up to visit. That was Eric's sister. So my warrant officer on the deployment, it was his sister. And she came up and she was like, hey, do you mind if I read your journals? And I was like, I guess not. Go ahead. And she read the Afghanistan one. And she was just kind of like, you need to turn this into a book because there's people that need to hear this stuff. And I had continued to write after I'd gotten sober. So that was kind of like one of my outlets. And so a lot of that after story is kind of in there. And she was like, I think people that just in general, like are alcoholics right now need to read this fucking book. And I was like, all right, I don't know how to do that. I mean, honestly, I'm just a dumb country guy from Hopkins, Missouri. And she's like, well, we'll sit down. We'll go through this every day. So it took a year of just editing and getting it ready, typing everything up. And by the time we were kind of finished, we were both kind of like, now what? Because she's never published a book. I've never published a book. And so I was like, well, this has got to be as simple as Googling how to publish a book and get on there looking for publishers, and found one in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, and just pitched my idea to them, sent them a draft of the book itself. And they were like, yeah, we want to work with you today. So they basically had to go through the process of their editors editing it, getting it everything prepared for when it would be published, which that took another year. So we're getting into 2020 at that point, and finally had kind of gotten a projected date of November last year when it would actually hit Amazon and all of that, and got the copy. And like what I had talked about earlier, there was a point where I was kind of on the fence about whether I was going to do this or not. And eventually I was just like, they had sent me the final draft of what they would want to publish. And I got it back, and I just was like, I didn't even read it. I was just like, I got to send this or I'm going to back out. And so they took it, and I just remember getting the 50 copies of the book that I got initially out of the gate. Was just like, holy shit, here it is. And I just didn't know. I was like, I still haven't read it. I still haven't sat, because all the editing, you're just like, it's just like writing a song. Like whenever you go into the studio, you have to record those parts hundreds of times. And by the time you're done recording, you're like, I never want to fucking hear this song again. Like that's seriously how you feel. And so with the book as well, that's how I felt. I was like, I never want to read this book again, and or even see it. I don't want to relive any of this. And people have been very receptive of it, and it's been the people that I didn't think would be receptive of it.
Which is
people from my hometown who are, just regular Joes that, just read it, and they were like, I didn't even know you could write, and this is very well written. And, makes me understand, like my brother who's overseas, and helps me understand kind of what he's going through and how to talk to him whenever we talk, and to let him talk and not so much share all this stuff that's going on in our lives, because the world kind of stopped turning for them over, like back here, but it's still going for us. And I'm like, well, I'm glad that's what you got out of it. It's kind of a big deal. So there was a lot, and my family, I think, saw a side of me that they didn't know about ultimately, just kind of that, like, you're on a deployment and it would be easier if you were just kind of left alone so you could focus on what you're doing, and not have to worry about coming back to the barracks and am I going to make the time crunch for who's got a FaceTime or Zoom or whatever it is. I guess it was. And they saw that and they were like, I wish you would have just said that. And I'm like, I didn't know how to say that without hurting your feelings. So, and I'm like, you're not thick-skinned like the guys I'm over here with. So I wasn't about to do that. But it was good for me. And I would push any veteran that's been overseas, and even you, if not, maybe you don't publish it, but I think sometimes it made me feel better just having Eric's sister read it. It was just like somebody else read it and kind of could help me navigate through maybe what I was thinking.
You say it, and I cringe thinking about let somebody else read it. I really did. Like, I genuinely, there's a knot in my stomach. Even think I would probably want to go back and read it at some point. This may hopefully be the catalyst for it. But
yep.
I don't, man, I don't even know what I wrote in that thing anymore. It's been so long. So I'm afraid of what anybody might think. I mean, it's like yours. I'm sure it's filled with a lot of just raw emotion. There's just a lot of things that when the catharsis you get from putting your thoughts on paper, without anybody to review them, edit them, judge them, quantify them. Sometimes they lose a little bit of context when you read them in a different environment, right? And I think that's part of it. And if I didn't say it before, I'll say now. I mean, there's a ton of credit and a ton of courage to you for going forward with that. Because again, as somebody who sits here in a similar spot, I don't know if I have the guts for that right now. I would probably read it first before I did it, but I think, in all honesty, for you to put those thoughts out there for the world to read and the world to judge and the world to take out of context takes a certain amount of personal courage that I'm not sure everybody has. So I tip my cap to you for doing that. And I certainly think that it's not as easy, as people think. Everybody thinks anybody who writes a book does it to make money. Well, I guess to a certain extent you write a book because there is a monetary possibility of gain to it. But in the same respect, I think every book starts with a simple idea of wanting to communicate something about someone or some experience or whatever. And it spitballs and takes on a life of its own after that. But the genuine, birth of a book is in an idea and a thought, I think, right?
It is. And I think I think it's important. And even if you're going to share those stories and everything else, it's like, if it's going to happen, one day it's going to click and you're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to go crack that because I want to read about that time that I got a massage from a Korean masseuse over in Afghanistan because I know that fucking story is funny and I want to laugh about it,
Yeah,
and
so those are the kind of stories I'm afraid of. I'm not going to lie. Those are the stories I'm not sure I think anybody, now that I have a wife and kids, I'm not sure I want that out in the public eye.
Yeah. Well, there's also the ones where it's just, your buddies and you have these inside jokes and you're going to remember them. And that's just like, oh yeah, I remember, this guy or this guy. And you're like, I totally forgot about that.
Let me ask you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, I imagine both these experiences, having a book you wrote released and having a song you wrote released, they may be similar in some ways. I think you talked about it a moment before, but is there any more sense of pride in one over the other? Can you compare the two?
I think it's more of, I'm more tied to music than I am to writing a book. I didn't care. Like, to me, like, it wasn't like, oh my God, the book came out. And I was just kind of like, all right. Like, it was cool. Like I kind of said, I was like, oh, I can't believe this happened. But like with a new song that comes out, I'm more of like, what's everybody going to think? How am I feeling? It's more important to me. But a book, it was just kind of like, I'll probably never do this again, but here we are. And like you're talking about, like monetary gain and, just making money off of it, it's not going to fucking happen. Like, I mean, unless you're like Jack Carr, and I'm not, so it's just, I'm not writing made for Amazon movies. It is very much the mundane life of the military soldier who's overseas working as a small arms repairer. But I think that, to me, the catalyst for why is there's a giant number of those guys that are in the Army that are probably, there's a lot of times that, like, the things that fueled me to continue writing that book was guys that I had spent time in the military with writing me and saying, what the fuck do you have to write about? And me saying, this is why I'm writing this. I'm going to keep going. And it's there. I mean, it's what that guy experienced. It's what that guy experienced. Whether or not we had different missions while we were out in Afghanistan or Iraq, we were still thinking the same shit every single day. And just sharing that. And it's funny. Like, to me, it's like the vet TV. It's just like, that's the shit everybody's thinking about, but nobody's actually telling civilians that we're thinking about it.
Better feeling, I think I know the answer. Having somebody come up to you and recognize your music, or somebody come up to you and saying, hey, I read your book?
That part's probably tough, but usually, I mean, the music thing is that's more of like what I'm trying to do. Trying to be a musician, and that would be more important to me. And I've had the opportunity to play with a lot of like bigger name acts and people that I would consider, like coming up and playing a show with Mark Chestnut, who was a huge country singer, like 90s, like big name 90s country singer. He was actually in Iraq and played a show while we were there. And these bigger name acts, I guess, that I play with, that's just, to me, that's more exhilarating than, I guess somebody coming up and saying, "Hey, I read your book." It's just like, cool. I'm glad you did it. Hopefully you got something out of it. But I'm sure on some level it's important to me. I just probably haven't found it yet. But
if you had to play cover songs the rest of your music career, would you rather cover country music or rock and roll?
I'd rather cover rock and roll. There's way more energy. It's more fun to sing. It's more fun to get up on stage and scream than it is to, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But
now you're starting to speak my language as a kid from New York, because you mentioned all those country artists before, and I'm like, I think I know one of those dudes you talked about. Garth Brooks, yep. I definitely know. I'm not sure about the other guy you mentioned. So yeah, country music is not my genre by any stretch of the imagination. I hope that doesn't offend you.
No.
But yeah, I mean, like if you sat there and played 80s music all night long, I'd be in, brother. I'm like,
oh, right. Hey, I play Whitesnake at shows.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Now you got me in.
See, and I'm a huge fan of Steel Panther. So
do you miss doing the metal stuff that you did before?
Dude, every time I turn on Architects or I turn on the new Gojira album, I'm like, God damn it, I gotta fucking do this again. Like, I just, yeah. That's the stuff that gets me going. That's like, if I'm about ready to play a show, I'm in the back with my headphones in, listening to Foo Fighters or something along those lines. It's just like in your face, rock and roll, and like that. I don't know. I just couldn't go in the back and listen to like Luke Bryan and get pumped up. I just couldn't do it.
I hear you. I'll have to say this much, and people who know the podcast well know our executive producer, Matt, and I know he's listening to this, and he would probably wonder if you could play some Cougar or play some Sega.
Sega.
Bob Seger, play some Sega. Yeah. We were, just funny story. We were out one, I forget where we were on active duty. This is when Matt and I were on active duty together, and we were out one night, and I forget who we were out. We were having a bunch of beers with a buddy, and he was, I think he was from Boston originally. And we were listening. He wanted to hear some Bob Seger. He's like, play some Sega. And so, Matt and I, every time we start talking about music, we just yell at each other to play some Sega and play some Cougar. So I guess in John Cougar Mellencamp. But anyway, that was just a little love for Matt, who doesn't get enough credit for all the work we do here.
I've actually, what was Bob Seger's huge hit song? Starts out with a piano opening.
Yes.
Nope.
Or Night Moves, or
oh shit. I'll think of it as soon as he recorded it at Muscle Shoals.
Matt is going to be so mad that I don't have the answer to this because he knows it and he can't chime in.
Yeah.
What else is it? Bob Seger. That Slow Love Song. Is that the one you're talking about?
Hold on, I got it right here. But I actually
I'm going to look it up with you.
Yep.
I know Night Moves, and I know Against the Wind. What else? Main Street. Turn the Page. I don't know. I'm at options here at this point.
I can't remember either. I can't remember which one. Anyway, that guitar or that piano that he opens I've played on that piano before, that he opened up that song with. Really? And that was like, holy shit, Bob Seger played this. And that's at Muscle Shoals Music Studio in Alabama. If you ever get a chance to go there, it's pretty fucking sweet.
So what do you look for your music career next?
Well, I just had a baby, so that's kind of slowed things down a little bit. But I've got shows coming up. Usually I'm booked up. I usually play probably 50 to 60 shows a year.
Wow.
Yep. And so of course, the past 2 years have been super slow with COVID and all of that. So I've been doing more virtual, which Facebook, they started really basically anybody that goes on Facebook and starts like live videos and plays music, even my own music, they start like they ban you for like 90 days if you like play any music that's not, you don't have proof that it's like original. Yeah. Yes, correct. And so I'm starting to get bans from like 2 years ago. Whenever I went live and played like a Garth Brooks song, right when I was first starting out, or well, starting to do online stuff, and I'm like, what the fuck? So it was hard to actually keep going, playing shows and all of that. But yeah, I've got shows coming up. I've got the one in Kansas and some cooler shows. I've gotten to play with some cool people the past couple of years, and just meeting the people that I meet through music is pretty awesome. But yeah, that right now I'm going to continue. I'm still writing like my next like EP or album, whatever I put out. And so it's more beneficial for somebody like myself to put out a single rather than a whole EP, for the simple fact that it costs a lot to record in general. And a lot of people are actually recording more on their own at home, but I just don't have that kind of setup. And, but for me to go in and record one song just for the simple fact of the time that it takes, for one, and the amount of money that it takes, because of the time that it's consumed in it, it's just not worth it doing 5 or 6 songs at a time, because it would take me 5 years to get that out. And by the time that hits, that music that I'm playing is probably passed by, because honestly, music is like day to day anymore. And it's such a young guys kind of game anymore with me, and guys my age are more of like a songwriter for those younger guys. And so you're not going to do that.
Would you want to do that? Would you want to do more just songwriting alone, or you want to play and sing?
I would always play and sing, but if somebody, I would have to relocate to Nashville to really get into the pipeline and really get to know, get into the songwriter pool with all of that. I have some friends that are living there and kind of grinding it out with other songwriters, and it's a fucking cutthroat business. Like if either you have it or you don't have it, and they're not going to give you the time to get your shit together, like ultimately. So
now you just stick to playing lullabies at night, right?
Yep. Randomly pulling one of my guitars off the wall and being like, hey, I know you're 7 months old, but have you ever heard this song? This is Chop Suey by System of a Down.
Whatever gets them to go to sleep at that stage, whatever knocks them out, doesn't matter. Yeah, I mean, you can play satanic cult music. If they pass out, it's a win.
Oh yeah.
Take it from a father of twins. So yeah, I remember those days.
You're super busy.
Again, so brand ambassador for Guitars for Veterans. Just a little more about what you're doing with them right now.
So we've actually got, recently during COVID, we did an online deal with Ford and some other charities that were actually donating more money to this. Luke Combs, who is a big country singer right now, is actually involved in it as well. And we did a live show, which it featured like Sully Erna of Godsmack, and some other bigger name people that are in the music genre at the moment. And we did that show, which garnered a shitload of money. Let's just say that it's, I think they were able to like get guitars in the hands of like, I don't know the number. I'm going to say 20,000 people, something like that were like, they're set for a long, long fucking time. But it's getting more of a national attention now, now that Luke Combs kind of took it and he's an ambassador for it as well. And so with that, we've got shows coming up here in the local area. I'll go out and volunteer time and play those just to basically continue to gain attention for the cause. So it's kind of they're kind of here and there. I've I'll get a text the night before. Hey, can you play this tomorrow? And I'm like, yeah, I'll be there. Always ready. So, and everybody that I work with in that is a veteran. So all of the staff and everybody, that's just one of the requirements is you have to be a veteran in order to even be on the staff. So we all kind of have the same common language, and it's at that point, it's fun to go hang out, play guitar. So
where can people get your music?
Anywhere, Pandora, Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, really anywhere that there's music. You can go to YouTube. I have music videos for a couple of my songs on YouTube, and it's all over the place.
Well, that's where you get the music. The book, Time Cap, you can get on Amazon, anywhere else you buy books as well. And don't forget to check out, again, Guitars for Veterans. Continued luck and success in the music field. Continue your Guard career. Again, we just mentioned you just recently were promoted to Staff Sergeant in the Guard, so congratulations, and continued success there as well. And obviously, the family life, man. Shoots at the top of the list of priorities. But best of luck, best of health, and everything with the baby and the family going forward, man. So we certainly appreciate you sharing your story and all the time and honesty and candor that you've given us. And again, I know people can relate to a lot of what you're talking about, and more of those things you mentioned in the book that a lot of people can relate to. So keep doing that yeoman's work as far as educating people on PTS and mental health for veterans, and continue just to be a good steward of the military community, brother, because I think that's what you're doing right now, and it's working well for you.
For sure. Thank you.
Nick Rucker, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you.
All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. Once again, thank you for joining us here on hazardground.com, on our YouTube channel. Don't forget killcliff.com, the Killcliff app as well. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.
You've been listening to Killcliff's Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.